Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for episode 7 of the Betterment Project. Today we are talking about the solution. And I'm laughing because I'm sure that sounds like I'm getting ready to bring down the golden tablets from the mountain of philosophical ethical theory to all you little people. But that is not, in fact, what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to build a common ethical framework, a set of principles, if you will, that will allow us to agree on what kind of life, what kind of common laws, principles, ways of living we need to be able to end conflict regardless of how different we are. So to put it another way, the solution is not domination. That would be funny, right? How do we end domination? I dominate you. That doesn't work, right? It's about negotiation. How can we all win? So I'm calling this the general individual set. This is a review from the last presentation. I'm calling it a set because this is a set of principles that are so abstract it's hard for me to call them a system. Uh, but this is what the individual, uh, what is required of an individual, um, not required, what happens to be the case for an individual, and where that gets us. So as I said last week, although I've added something, values plus resources plus abilities, what we want in life, what we have conceptually and physically that'll help us get there, our abilities to use those things. Then I've added freedom, which I'll get to in a second, minus whatever limitations and lacks we have in our resources, in our abilities. Um, that equals our opportunity minus whatever adversity we're left with. In other words, if we are missing out on ability, if we're missing out on a resource, then we can't achieve our opportunities. Okay. So freedom is the ability to choose unimpeded by unethical dominance. I'm not. I'm simply trying to define a very practical conception of freedom here. Uh, we have an ability to choose. We appear to. We go through processes. If that is impeded by someone, then we don't have freedom. That's what I'm referring to here. So that's the way an individual reacts, or how the process an individual go through. But an individual can be wrong, right? Our ideas about reality, our values, even our values themselves could be wrong, right? We're not transparent to ourselves. The values we have may not actually be what we want to be achieving, right? How often do you hear about students who are trying to get a degree and then they realize this is not what I wanted to do? The Betterment Project is an attempt to help us categorize, and that's one of the parts of the project, categorize our values and build a stable value hierarchy. So in other words, we could be wrong, so we need others to help us identify those problems. In episode 2, I gave a practical action list for the second half of the episode, I believe it was. And so to just run through those again, there's a humbling phase. We got to admit that we could be wrong. Complete. Our conceptions are our ideas as complete as we know how to make them. Critique. Do we seek critique from others? And do we critique ourselves on how consistent our ideas? How they measure up to the external reality around us, the appearances of who we are and what reality is. And are they livable? Do they motivate us to actually do what we say we're going to do? Do they produce the values that we believe they will? Do those values endure? Or are they like our New Year's resolutions that quickly fade away? Those are the issues that we need to know if we are to, if you will, grade our value hierarchy correctly. And if we find anything wrong with our critique, if we find something incomplete, we improve, right? Our beliefs and our value hierarchy. And finally, the general individual system I said a couple slides ago, we can say that as our action point, figuring out what opportunities we have and taking advantages of. And if we go through a process of evaluating with other people, with the help of other people, then we can revise our value hierarchy. So I call this the general social set. Once we've, whether or not we've evaluated our hierarchy of values. Uh, this is the general, again, this is review from last time. This is the general way in which we have conflict, only I've added something again. So our differences, which often lead to our disagreements, which often lead to our divisions. Add to that all of the adversities of the things we don't have that we wish we did, and then most significantly, minus a balanced resolution or a methodology for balanced resolution, which is what the Betterment Project hopes to supply. We have conflict. If all those things are true, we have conflict. But what's wrong with conflict, right? I just watched my son play football last night, and I was cheering him on. It was a flag football, just in case you wanted to know. Cheering him on as he dominates on the field, right? It's fun, but it's constrained dominance, right? It's constrained conflict. It's agreed upon. It's contractual, if you will. There are rules, and everybody who's playing has agreed upon those rules. So there's no problem with that, right? You know, as long as you're not being forced to play against your will. But, well, okay, let's say you were. The people who were forcing you to play football against your will uh, would have to constantly try to make you play, right? Um, conflict drains our resources, though, our reserves of energy, our will, our 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 time. Um, if conflict is not resolved, it lasts. It promotes dominance. You know, you're dominating the person who doesn't want to play football and trying to make them play football, which promotes rebellion, right? Which creates more conflict drain or more drain of resources. Just it's like a cycle. Is that what we want to live by? Do we want to live in a world of conflict? And just imagine, I mean, we don't always realize that we do want conflict, right? We want to show those people that they're wrong. We want to get our man in office, and we want to change the country and do what we want done. It's conflict, right? I mean, if you're trying to win against, you know, a large percent of the population, or even a small percent of the population for that matter, uh, you're simply trying to play a dominance game. How long can it last? How much energy do you want to spend doing that? And do you want to, and can you, deal with the ethical implications? Especially since I'm going to try to point them out here. So how do you end conflict? Well, there's the balanced resolution I keep talking about, or there's ending individuals, which I hope you would agree is quite unethical, you know, by death or by some method of complete domination. We probably don't have that technology yet, but we could conceivably get it someday, a methodology that would completely dominate people into submission. Genetic manipulation, brainwashing, a combination of those things. I really, even if we get there, I hope there's something like the Betterment Project in place that keeps us from unethically ending conflict by utterly dominating others, right? I hope we can agree on that. So what is this balanced resolution I keep talking about? Well, let's return to our equation. I don't remember if I talked about this yet. I'm formatting these ideas as an equation because they are at such a high level of abstraction, it makes it very easy for us to evaluate these ideas. And then whatever ethic or legal system we develop can be very quickly compared to these principles in this format. Um, and again, that just points to the fact that I'm not suggesting what the laws should be and what your ethics should be. I'm trying to build the framework which our ethics could be hung on. So to return to our this equation from earlier, difference plus a disagreement plus division, but plus betterment ethics equals balanced resolution. Now I've just kind of played a trick on you, right? I've just packed a word in there full of ideas. And of course I'm going to go through them, but I will say that I have not even completely decided on what betterment ethics are supposed to be. And it's a process. I think, in fact, while I was making this video, I realized I didn't have the ideas completed and I had to scramble to put everything together. Oh, I'm sure that built confidence in me. Oh well, I'll leave it in. So here we go. What are betterment ethics? an attempt to set up the principles that explain how we can avoid harm and conflict. That's the whole point in a nutshell of the Betterment Project. So, I'm going to suggest some primary principles, a set of principles uh, that will allow that goal to be achieved. I think it will not be to the liking of everyone, but I hope to show that it will lead everyone to whatever goal they are eventually hoping to achieve. So, principle number one is self ownership, producing ownership of labor and products. I don't know how to get away from this. Um, because it appears to be the case that by respecting what an individual wants and what they do with their abilities determines how we achieve our goals in the first place, right? If you're not able, if somebody's keeping you from owning what you do with your body and achieving your goals, how can anybody ever know what it is that you really want, right? I mean, I suppose you could tell them, but there's a satisfaction in doing it yourself, right? Um, there's even certain dominance games we really enjoy, like I said, and some of them are quite motivating as long as they're done in an ethical way, right? So uh, this slide is probably a little confusing. This is a primary principle, but it is not a dominant primary principle. So if this were a singular linear uh, argument, as I've argued against before, then it would be dominant, right? This primary principle would come before any other considerations, and you would have to just deal with it. However, in a systemic uh, argument, uh, a primary principle does not have to dominate all the other principles. It can be mediated by secondary principles, and this is the case here. So self-ownership, ownership of our actions is the primary principle, but the secondary principle is a recognition that we are all linked within a common system. Our actions have effect and influence on each other. This mediates the primary principle, is what I'm saying, so that we need to be aware of our effect on others, from a direct harm to the less obvious, which I will get into soon. I'm referring to atmospheric harms and aid here. I'm probably not going to call it atmospheric harm very much, but it's a good slide title. These are indirect actions that can compound and affect others, that can compound, build up, and affect other people as they compound, for good or bad, right? We can call most of these actions virtues and vices. So to give an example, let's imagine that we live in a society that, to borrow from Martin Luther King, has achieved the dream, right? It's not that we're colorblind, it's that we respect each other and we behave in a way that garnishes respect, that earns respect. We allow people to do, we give each other freedom. We allow each other to chase the dreams they want to chase, and we don't get in their way. We may even aid them, regardless of who they are. We only judge each other by how consistent they are with their values and whether or not their values get in our way, right? We let complete freedom of religion, complete freedom of gender and action and anything like that. As long as it's not harming me, I will respect you because you are respecting me. That's the goal. That's the dream I picture, at least. But if you can imagine in that society, one individual, one cranky cretin who does not value black people simply because of the color of their skin and does not value women being free to seek challenging jobs, let us say, earn their own pay, earn their own way, um, wants them barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, right? I would imagine that in such an egalitarian society, such a person would not so much be hated as just dismissed. At least that's the vision I have. Why would you expend any energy on such an individual? It's like, you are not worth my time. Bye. They would be kind of excluded, right? They would have very little power because they have very little respect. So That's fine, maybe. But imagine a society full of people like this who are judging people by the color of their skin or by their gender and or sex, whichever term you would prefer to use. Um, that creates an atmosphere in which those people suddenly cannot pursue their values. And that's a problem, according to the Betterment Project, at least. So let's talk about virtue. This is a restriction of oneself in order to improve oneself and reduce the chances of harming others. So, this is the idea of self-discipline, of exercising so that you don't, you're not a weak person, but a strong person, so that your body is healthy, so you don't become a burden in any way like that. You could list all the traditional virtues of Christianity, even. Lust is kind of a problem if you're, um, well, I'll get into that in a second as we get into what vice is. A lack of self restraint resulting in a potential degradation of self and an increased potential for others being harmed. So if you're a woman, let's say, you live in a society of men who are just all the time lusting, it's a habit for them. It's not just something they do in their private life, let's say. They don't have it constrained, right? Then that creates a society that is vicious to you. And that's a problem, according to the Betterment Project. So, to put it in a social context, the greater number of people in a population who are virtuous, the lower the probability of harm and offense, right? Notice I haven't even defined what I mean specifically by virtue, so hopefully you can use your imagination and imagine. The more people who are respectful to each other, that earn your respect, the more people who don't judge each other, that are tolerant of beliefs that they don't like, um, that live and let live. That is a society with less harm and less offense. Less offense, you might be very offensive to somebody, but because you are doing so not out of a intent to harm or offend, but are doing so because this is simply your value system, then I have a hard time believing that people cannot learn tolerance for that. That, if you will, is part of what I'm referring to here. So likewise, in a vicious society, a vice in a social setting, the greater number of people in a population who are vicious, the higher the probability of harm and offense. So again, I'm not referring to things that are directly, how shall we say, unethical or directly harmful. I am talking about how well restrained they are. That is the issue here when we're talking about vice. Aid just the opposite, or virtue just the opposite. It's it's self-control, it's aid to others. That's a kind of virtue, right? That creates a better society, and therefore a place where there is less conflict, less chance of conflict, less certainly less dominance and oppression, hopefully less suffering in general. That's not even caused by people, just circumstances. All right. So to sum all this up, and I've already kind of said this, freely choosing to be virtuous, not vicious, creates a more tolerant and respectful society in spite of difference, disagreement, even division, and adversity. That was the word I was looking for, adversity. I hope that's clear, right? So these problems that create conflict, difference, disagreement, creating divisions, then we slip down into conflict unless we have something, an atmosphere, if you will, of virtue, uh, a way of dealing with each other that allows us to be motivated to resolve conflict. That's what the Betterment Project is all about. And you notice I haven't even said any laws, right? I haven't said this is what your ethics should be. I've simply said this is the atmosphere that helps us resolve conflict so that we don't have to dominate, or so that we're not tempted to dominate and we don't get into a dominant cycle. One other category I should speak about, though, is this idea of virtuous harms. This is what your policemen do. This is what your soldiers do. This is, in a sense, what a doctor does when they have to poison you in order to kill the cancer that would otherwise kill you. So these are those actions which harm to end harm. Regrettable, right? It's regrettable that you have to do harm. It's perhaps even punishable in some situations. Uh, War is a sticky situation. I'm trying to decide still how I feel about it. I don't think we should ever deride a homecoming hero if it truly is a hero. Well, yeah, that's a whole nother topic. But we need to recognize that though evil was done, it was done to try to end greater harms. Um, Gosh, that's a big topic. This is. I was hoping I wouldn't have to do. I was thinking I wouldn't have to do an episode on harms, but virtuous harms. But I'm realizing just how many topics are connected with that one. Okay, well, so I haven't told you what to do, right? So how is this an argument? Well, again, what I'm trying to do here is create a set of principles that tell us how not to dominate. And obviously, I cannot dominate in order to end domination. That would just be kind of unethical. It'd be hypocritical as well. So, what I'm trying to do instead is to demonstrate from the position of ending conflict and dominance what we could do as a society to solve our problem. Yeah, that's why that's the title of this slideshow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for watching another episode. Thank you for joining me. Please get those YouTube algorithms going up so that more people get to see this wonderful video, right? And please join me next time. Thank you.